I'm here today with Matthew David Wilder, and you prefer Matthew over Matt, do you not?
Sure.
Who is a screenwriter and the director of a number of excellent films, which we'll be talking about today. Most recently, or not most recently, but one of the ones I definitely want to talk about today is your movie regarding the case of Joan of Arc, which I believe is very underrated and was very prescient. It came out in 2018. I believe it's more relevant to us now than ever. So I definitely we'll talk more about that later. Sure. But Matt also wrote the screenplay, or Matthew rather, also wrote the screenplay for Dog Eat Dog, which Paul Schrader directed in 2016. He's got a lot of recent work that I would also like to talk about today. But before I run my mouth too much, why don't you introduce yourself, Matt? Yeah.
Okay, I'll just to say this at the outset. We have a picture that we're shooting in Los Angeles in May. That is, it's secret. It's through a. Here's the little Easter egg that I'll give your listeners. It's through a studio that's having a very good moment right now.
Yes.
You guys can decrypt that one as you like. But it is. I'm not allowed to talk too much about it quite yet. Maybe by the time this podcast drops, we can say more. But it has two fantastic actors, and it is a fictionalized version of a famous true crime story in California. So that's what I am plunged into at the moment. But you want me to give my story in brief?
Sure.
My story in brief is I grew up in a town called Des Plaines, Illinois. If anybody listening has ever blown through the O'Hare Airport in Chicago, that's it. When you look outside the window of O'Hare Airport and you see a grim exurban wasteland, that was my hometown. A very strange experience growing up, and I think we can get into this maybe a little bit later, but it's something that I think a lot of Americans share, which is it's a place that has absolutely no indigenousness. It was like growing up like a feral child in a 5-mile round 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
So what you remembered growing up was fluorescent lights and Hostess fruit pies and maybe Mountain Dew jugs, but there was not a local indigenous flavor to anything. It was all commerce.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very common American experience.
Definitely.
That's kind of not too much talked about, which is sort of like the identity of no identity.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there's not a lot of that. But that's where that's sort of how I grew up. I grew up in a trailer park. My trailer park was worse than Eminem's trailer park. And then I lived with my grandparents and my mom when I was a little bit older in a nearby town. And I went to Yale.
Yes.
I went to UCSD for directing theater. And I spent quite a long time in theater. I directed theater around the country. And, as I was doing that, I got representation here for writing movies. And I wrote for people like Clive Barker. I wrote for Oliver Stone. Wrote for Rennie Harlan.
And this would have been the 1990s,
It was
basically?
in the 90s, yeah. In the 90s, I moved to L.A. And still doing, did a lot of theater. And I have, to date, I've directed 2 very nano features. I like both of them, but they're very nano. One is called Your Name Here, which features Bill Pullman, who is quite brilliant playing a guy named William J. Frick, who's kind of a ripoff of Philip K. Dick. And then I directed another picture that you just mentioned called Regarding the Case of Joan of Arc, which takes the exact text of the questioning of Joan of Arc and places it in Guantanamo Bay in a near future where Joan is a sort of, I guess you could call her white nationalist or sort of Christian nationalist.
More Christian nationalist was
there's
my
more.
read.
There's more.
Yeah.
I kind of wish if we had gone back, we would make her, I think, politically a little more explicit, but definitely Christian. And just to speak to that movie, I mean, the thing that was so crazy as we worked on that film was that if you read Joan's words that she spoke to her questioners, about repelling the English in France, what she was saying was the same things that at the moment we were making the movie, you would hear,
right?
2017, yeah. You would hear Trump, Sebastian Gorka, Steve Bannon saying those things about Islam or about Mexicans or whatever.
Yeah.
Joan was saying those things almost word for word. Just cross out the names and put in another name. She was saying the exact same things. So yes, that picture I think is it is very of. I mean, it was I think prescient at that time, but I think now it's kind of our.
I
moment.
think more so. So my story is I'd heard about the movie around the time it came out, but I didn't see it. It was a somewhat limited release, etc. But it is on Tubi now. Now, there may be certain things about the Tubi version that are not.
Okay, now
I'll let you get into it.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So this is a film that. The process is just beyond belief. I mean, we made this film for very little money. The producers, I think, didn't like it. They didn't understand it, and we got into the National Film Festival of India, of all things. Yeah. Very strange. We went to the National Festival of India in Goa and showed it, and not too long after, maybe I don't know. It was a while after. Maybe it was 2020, right when the pandemic hit. There was released this ridiculous version of the movie that the producers had taken to somebody in Las Vegas, and I don't know if they even. I guess they recut the movie.
There's the first scene shows her.
Don't tell me. Don't tell me. I don't want to know. But if you look at the cover box, it looks like Olympus has fallen. Yeah, it has sort of like the exploding version. Capitol or something like that. Now, this whole movie was shot here in L.A. in Chinatown in a sweaty sweatshop. In a studio space. It has a courtroom, it has a jail cell, it doesn't have too much else. Somehow in this direct-to-video version, there's I don't know, images of the Capitol exploding or buildings blowing up or something of that nature. Now Nicole La Liberté, who is a very, very brilliant woman who plays Joan.
I'll just add, listeners to this podcast may know her from the first or second episode of Twin Peaks: The Return, where she plays Daria, as I believe the character's name. Right. Interesting sort of. She plays opposite Kyle MacLachlan in that. Very, very good. And in Matt's picture, absolutely brilliant. Really carries it.
Now, so during the pandemic, they released this Walmart DVD version of the movie with like the Capitol exploding and stuff. And Nicole called me and said, if somehow a DVD of this movie ever lands in your hands and you put it in and turn it on, I guarantee you will die like The Ring. You'll have a heart attack and fall to the floor. You'll be so outraged at what happened that you'll literally die.
I can't even imagine as an artist and as a director, a filmmaker, coming across something where they compromised your work so much. So you don't even want to know anything about it.
I can't.
It's like seeing one of your children.
Seeing one of your children abducted, and we won't even go any further with that.
Jeez. But I say all that to say that I didn't see the original cut.
Well, you know what maybe we could do, if your listeners are interested in this, is we can attach the original to your
there's a link that you can put out.
For sure, 100%.
And we're not going to get sued by...
no. I don't think they could sue their grandmother. But we could attach that so people could see the actual real original intent.
That would be ideal, and I will of course watch it as well. I mean, basically, as you kind of alluded to, it is. I'm trying to think of the right word, because you say art film and it calls to mind images of pretension. There's nothing pretentious about it, but it is an artistic statement, no doubt. It is a topical, thoughtful, not a slow burn by any means, because there is some intense stuff in it. There's a rather intense waterboarding scene, etc. Obviously, the subject matter, you can see how someone may misinterpret it, or some terrible production company may try to make money by turning it into an Olympus Has Fallen style action flick, but it is not that. It is how would you describe it? Genre.
It's a courtroom drama.
It's a courtroom drama, of course.
I mean, it's set in a courtroom and there's drama, and Joan does burn at the stake at the end. Only it's not a stake. It's a lethal injection chamber.
which that scene too is very moving.
it's-
I always find executions on camera to be very disturbing, but this one definitely does not disappoint with regard to that. It's quite the conclusion. But I get into this because while I didn't see it in 2017, 2018 when it was made and released, I saw it now, and I would make that argument, as I think I've already said, that I think it's more relevant in some ways now than it was at the time, and that maybe audiences would be more ready for it.
Sure.
I think probably in 2018, things were so tense in terms of what anyone was willing to talk about or think about with regard to the Trump administration and flyover country and nationalism and these kinds of issues. I think we are entering into a time in which there's still issues, no doubt. I'm not overly naive or optimistic, but I think people are more ready to kind of look back on that with their retrospective, like, okay, this is what was going on at that time, and engage in more constructive thought on it. And also, I think it's more relevant now and was in fact prescient of events like January 6th because of that kind of type of nationalism thing you're talking about. In 2017, early 2018, all anyone was thinking about was Charlottesville and Richard Spencer and the Jews will not replace us thing. And that is not that is not Joan's character.
No. I will just tell you what. I don't want to clog up your link for your podcast with this, but I saw an image the other day that made me really laugh out loud. That made me go, "Wow, Joan we were really right on the nose." Which is, I don't know if you've seen this, but Trump had a #1 single on, I don't know if it was on Spotify or what's the one that's kind of like Spotify? But
Apple Music.
It's not Apple Music. What's the one that tells you what you like and it gives you something else?
Pandora?
Pandora.
Yeah.
I think it was on Pandora. And it's Trump plus a thing called the Jan 6 Choir.
Yeah.
So it's these guys who are in jail for Jan 6. And every night they get together and they sing the Star Spangled Banner.
About this.
So
like Baked Alaska and people like that?
Baked Alaska. No, he got sprung this week.
Oh, did he?
He got sprung. The QAnon shaman got sprung. Chris Chan got sprung.
So they all got sprung and other people are getting indicted.
But some Sixers are still in there. And every night they gather in a room and they sing the Star Spangled Banner. So some lawyer recorded off the phone these guys singing the Star Spangled Banner, and they sent it to Donald Trump. And he recorded himself saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
How did I miss this?
It was...
I guess it was kind of... it was not widely publicized.
It was fringy. He was dealing with Stormy Daniels.
Yeah. You have to give it a listen, and I will link it.
But here's the thing. The only reason I mention this is if you look at Spotify or whatever, the little the page that has the song has a graphic on it that is a dungeon wall with numbers scratched on it, like 1 through 5, counting out the days.
Yeah.
And then up at the top there's a window with the American flag crisscrossed by barbed wire. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a Saul Bass poster for regarding the case of Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Only it's coming from Trump and the Jan 6ers.
Yeah. No.
It's like, oh my God, we've really arrived at that moment where our movie is not science fiction anymore. It's just
it is reality.
Life.
And again, I think especially, not to harp on this too much, but especially post January 6th, the dynamics are much more in line with what you see there. It's really a certain flyover contingent that has this kind of do or die. But no, as these kind of things rank up, as the tensions rile back up heading into another election year next year, not to get ahead of ourselves, but I think this kind of thing we see in the movie is more relevant than ever.
I think so, and I think now we're going to see. I'm interested to see what your take is on this. Because people back at the time we made the film, and up to now, talk a lot about Civil War, and very clearly, what a Civil War might look like in America is certainly nothing like our first Civil War.
Right.
But what would it look like? I wonder. It has always seemed to me like. For instance, the school shooting that just happened in Tennessee, that it's that sort of massacre with a message, that there's a possibility of that sort of thing, like sort of isolated violence that has an ideological slant, rather than two sides of people in uniforms, firing on each other, but that it's a bit more like terrorist violence, and that's what in our Joan movie, Joan gets her followers to blow up federal buildings, They and you know, and not to harp on this too much, but you know, they talk. Joan talks a lot about Waco and Ruby Ridge,
Right.
and in the original, you know, we took French names out and put in Waco and Ruby Ridge because I think to these kind of militia people, movement people, those are like holy sites to them.
Absolutely.
And in fact, Trump, I think, in his campaign had a rally at Waco recently.
Did he? I mean, wow, I'm a little out of the loop.
Which is a very fraught space,
yeah.
particularly if you are in that QAnon adjacent kind of world where you see a lot of deep state conspiracies. I think that's kind of a very fraught site. Well, one thing that I was talking to somebody about this last night. One thing that I find really strange is I think the kind of politics that I saw as a young adult, let's say in the age of Clinton and young Bush, which was, you know, the complaint at the time was always that politics were Pepsi versus Coke. It was the same thing on both sides. That's what got Ralph Nader, to rise for a moment. Ross Perot came in that way. And there was a feeling that everything was sort of the same. Now we're in a moment where that sort of corporatist, I guess you could call it technocratic, managerial kind of government is homeless. I think, someone, like Mitt Romney is sort of like this weird isolated character. You can't imagine somebody like John McCain or John Kerry, these centrist, corporatist, the Trumpers would call them elitist, I guess.
Yeah.
They have absolutely nowhere. There's nowhere for them. They have no public support. I think there's just the two far sides.
Yeah.
And I wonder why you think that may be at this particular moment.
Why do I think that is? I think that it boils down to people's need for, not to armchair sociologist here, but I think fundamentally it comes down for people's need for meaning and a cause to fight for. Which relevant to Joan, absolutely relevant. That's what makes a character like Joan in your movie so compelling and charismatic, even if you don't agree with her politically, which I do think was one of your intentions, is to truly make a charismatic character that even if you find her politically reprehensible, you might see something in. But I think there's a real... The extreme sides can provide that in a way that the managerial establishmentarian class simply cannot. Mm-hmm. That's the issue with those Mitt Romney types. I would even put Biden in this category. I think he's had to signal leftward, but he is definitely, an establishmentarian, no doubt. And I think that the reason why I kind of lost my train of thought here, but basically that what makes these people unappealing is that they don't offer that deeper sense of meaning to people,
right.
That deeper sense of struggle, which is a human need. And I think that's a fundamental... Many of them may be, and I'm not really a fan of Romney, certainly, or Biden, mm-hmm. But I don't think they're necessarily incompetent. Not totally, anyway. They're, mm-hmm. Biden is handling things just fine in a certain sense. People would point to Afghanistan. Well, that probably was going to... I think he's managing things fine, but that's not all we want from politics. That we want something that we can feel in our gut we want people who are competent, but we also want that sense of identity and that sense of meaning that can come from... It can come from nationalism, but it can also come from a more general kind of patriotism or sense that your country is a role for good in the world, these kinds of things. And there's just been, after Iraq, after the 2008 crisis, there's just been the establishment cannot provide that. Obama sort of did just by being who he is, which is, a charismatic person. But following that, there's a real crisis of that, a crisis of faith, a crisis of sort of meaning amongst the people. And that's where you kind of have Trump step in. He provided that for a lot of people. Clinton couldn't do it so much. Now, the trouble with Trump is that I do think, proved to be very incompetent in many, many ways. So, ideally we'd have someone who's both competent, but also provides a vision. Again, I don't really want to. Well, to go back to your work soon, but this is all worthwhile.
Well, no. Anyway, I think our film is interesting for a number of reasons, and one of them is that this kind of character, who is, I mean, I think, certainly Joan in our movie is a more idealistic and noble figure than most of these, the Jan Sixers who you see, who are mostly like pleading to get out, like, I didn't mean it, I didn't know what I was doing. She absolutely does mean it and will die for it. But the thing that to me was interesting in working on this film was that the intention, very clearly from the beginning, it was kind of like, if people know the 1970 movie Patton with George C. Scott, which won Best Picture in its day, where Patton, wrapping up World War II, is viewed in such a way. Francis Coppola wrote this script, which is a great script. It's viewed in such a way where the Vietnam War hawks who saw the movie said, "Yeah, this guy's great. This guy knows how to kick some ass.
Yeah.
We could use a few more guys like this." And at the same time, the peaceniks could watch this movie and say, "What a brilliant picture of military psychosis, of the madness of this imperialist, militaristic mind." Both of those things are absolutely in the movie, but the movie's not wishy-washy. It just contains
shows, not tells.
The yin and yang. I think it just contains both of them at once. And the character is absolutely both those things. And same in our movie. I think you could see this film and see it as a sort of maybe a deadpan satire or a dissection of that kind of extreme nationalist character. But also I wanted to make it so that people who are that sort of extremist would see this movie and wipe away tears at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And hopefully both of those things coexist.
Yeah, and I can vouch for it, having seen it, that I do think it achieves that very much. And yeah, would love to be able to put the link to the proper version of the film in. Before we move on from Joan, I don't know if you want to talk about this. We can always cut this part out if not. You have talked about trying to actually buy the rights back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Give it a proper release. Put it in its proper context.
To be continued.
Yeah.
Well, it's just this film was released in a Baudelarized fashion in 2020. It does not represent the intention of the film at all, and I doubt that version of it made much money. So my intent is to go back and get the rights to the movie proper and get it a proper release. I think it's so potent now.
I think so too.
And I think people would really be into it.
Yeah, and like from the perspective of someone who dabbles in sort of political Twitter, I think it's very underrated by that group too. And I'm happy that I can put this podcast out and hopefully get more people to watch it.
Great.
Because it's very much, I think, something that the corner of Twitter that this pod is going to go out to are really going to like and appreciate. And yeah, maybe you'll be getting even more podcast invites, reviews. Hopefully, like, help get it in the in the ether a little bit. But to back up a little bit, I guess, just you touched on your youth growing up in Illinois. I did want to touch on that point you made about kind of growing up not just in suburbia, but it's like a deeper level than suburbia, where it's that blankness.
It's a thing I think we don't really have words for. It's and if you've driven around the country a lot, you see quite a lot of this where you
especially
will go
post-pandemic. It's kind of worsened.
I haven't really driven around post-pandemic, but I know you'll go through, let's say, Oklahoma, and you go 100 miles to the next rest stop, the next gas station, and 100 miles of nothingness, and then bam, there's an AM/PM mini mart and I don't know, maybe a fast food joint or something like that. But there's this landscape of void peppered with big boxes. And that is really, it's funny, that is really how much of America lives. I mean, we both live together, we live both in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And, one thing that you realize when you live in a city in America is something like a mom and pop place, a mom and pop spaghetti shop, a mom and pop bookstore is a luxury that you only have in cities. It's kind of like the reverse of the 20th century where, if you lived in the 20th century, you lived in a small town that had crazy, a little folksy shop or a bar or something. and then you went to the big city and there were big things.
Yeah.
Now it's sort of the reverse, where if you aren't in a city, you get this, I guess you could call it globalized consumer, corporate, big box culture that has no indigenousness. It has nothing. There's nothing specific to it. It's the same in South Dakota as it is in Maine. And that's the life of a lot of people, and that's something that, when I was a kid, I'm sure.
Granted.
Yeah, well, I think everybody has, if you grow up in a small place, you have fantasies of escape, and for me, it was New York. I was a little kid, and I had a subscription to the Village Voice, which you may be young enough that you don't even remember the Village Voice.
I know it is, certainly. Yeah.
It was an alternative weekly in New York that was. I mean, it was the thing. I don't know what even an equivalent of it is now, because we're in such a different landscape.
Yeah.
But
Pauline Kael wrote for it.
Pauline Kael wrote for the New Yorker.
Right.
But the New Yorker. Okay, so I read that as well, and dreamt of those places, these iconic places in New York City where writers and artists went and talked to one another. That was something that really pulled me through my youth. Was just that dreaming of going into the big city. Right. Now I think it feels as if everyone who lives in big cities is dreaming of escaping to. It is
amazing that reversal that has happened over the course of the 20th into 21st century. There's other examples of that too. Not to go off on too many tangents, but just even something like marriage. Like it used to be like the elites would kind of have their fun through their 20s and maybe settle down later. But now it's almost like, I think Jordan Peterson is talking about it, like marriage is almost something that's only for the elites now. Only they can afford it. There's a lot of things like that, like this kind of yearning back for a simpler life that used to be the stuff of relative economic, non-privilege, and now has made this insane circle. But bracketing that, because that's another kind of political angle, I definitely know what you mean and can relate, in fact, to that notion of wanting to go to New York. I've actually never lived in New York City, but kind of one thing, and I'm not from a trailer park, but I'm from suburbia, which is, there's a little bit of that blankness to that too. And from a young age, I sort of realized that my ticket to better, not that my life was bad, but my ticket to indulging in my passions, shall we say, intellectually and artistically, was going to be to study, get into a good school. Later went to Cornell, later moved here. And, did you kind of come to that conclusion at a young age too, that like the path was going to be through school? Because I know you went to Yale.
I mean, I didn't even, it's funny when I look back on this stuff, it wasn't like a choice. I didn't feel like I had, a fork in the road or anything like that. I was like, I got to get the fuck out of here and I have to go somewhere. So what does one do? Well, you go to the best school you can. I went to a high school that was very much about that, in that time, that sort of, get into a good school. And I had a very strange experience with that in terms of it's one of those weird moments where you realize how your fate is determined. Yeah. I really wanted to go to Harvard. And many people in my school went there. One of my very best friends, the year ahead of me, went, and the school generally sent somebody there every year. Well, I found out from our college counselor in this school that her husband, who is the guy who ran John Nuveen, which was like the Goldman Sachs of Chicago, he was the CEO of this company, and he was a big guy, and he donated a lot of money to Yale. And he got on the phone with some person at Harvard and said, okay, there's this kid in our school. He really wants to go to Harvard. And, our high school here, we haven't sent anybody to Yale in years and years. So we think we'd like this guy to go there. Is there somebody that you'd like to trade us for? Who's somebody who really wants to go to Yale? So one Harvard person and one Yale person were swapped. So I was in this swap.
Oh, man.
And I didn't get into Harvard, and I did get into Yale. Now, what would my life have been like if that guy hadn't had a weird hair up his ass to finally get somebody from his high school into this college? What would my life have been? Would we be sitting here right now?
Who knows? Because Listen, Harvard's kind of the holy grail of these schools, but Yale's no schlub, and Yale is probably better for dramatic theater.
Yeah, I think for things relating to art at that time, it was definitely the better place to go.
I think it probably still is, honestly. Hard to say, but
I don't know. But it's just one of those things where
one of those things. Yeah.
It's like sliding doors. You just realize in your life there are these moments where something happens that completely changes the outcome of your life.
Yeah.
That's not in your control at all. Like if you had met this person a minute earlier or a minute later or whatever,
butterfly effect a little bit. Yeah. And basically, as you kind of said, you got you've been movie mad your whole life. Right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
But your first thing you were engaging in at Yale was theater, right?
Well, it was in the sense that I had a great encounter, had a great sort of teacher at a young age. It was, I don't know if your listeners know this guy, the opera and theater director Peter Sellers, Sellers with an A, Sellars. He's a little man with tall, spiky hair, and he's an electrifying speaker. He's an incredibly electrifying speaker. And he does sort of contemporary set productions of classic works. And he did a lecture called Hitchcock and Design. And I saw this. I was working in the drama school library, and I saw this sign that said Hitchcock and Design. I thought, oh, cool. That sounds good. Oh, Peter Sellers, that little guy with the spiky hair who does weird theater productions. Okay, cool. So I went to see it, and it was really life-changing because he talked to the students about something that made so much sense to me and was really life-changing, which is he said, you guys all want to make movies. Well, it's going to take you years and years to go talk some guy into giving you $5 million and go make a movie, but you can do something absolutely great, shatteringly great, that people will remember for the rest of their lives. You can do it right now on this sofa sitting out in front of your apartment with 3 friends for no money, for literally $0. You can do Hamlet by William Shakespeare for $0, and it will be fantastic, and it will rock people's worlds. And he said, do this and just do lots of it. Do every 2 weeks, put on a different show, do a different play, do the Greeks, do Shakespeare, do Sam Shepard, do whatever, and just keep making things. Just keep making things. Keep making things. Just keep making them. You'll find that some shows are great, some are terrible. Some will maybe have 10 minutes that are just absolutely sublime, and the rest sucks. But you are going to learn so much. You're going to learn so much about acting, about lighting, about decor. You're going to learn so much about everything. And you're going to create. You're not going to be one of these, what our city of Los Angeles is filled of, people sitting somewhere in a job wishing they were creating something.
Yeah, just
you're
talking about
things
stuff. Ad infinitum. Yeah.
And so I followed that, and it was an incredible lesson, an incredible gift.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was going to bring this up more towards the end as a kind of global reflection on your work in Hollywood, but maybe now is the time, because to compare and contrast that, the thrill of kind of do-it-yourself theater with the way that Hollywood works, which is slow. People spend a lot of time talking about things that never come into fruition. It's also just an awful industry in so many ways. It's we can talk about the woke stuff later, but even outside of that, just it's very hard to actually get something made. And a friend of yours, Brett Easton Ellis, always talks about the development hell that things go through. Even things that you have the highest hopes for will just fall apart in the end. So it can be this incredibly disheartening industry, probably much more so obviously than theater, or do-it-yourself theater at least. But not to blow too much smoke up your ass, but I do definitely see you as someone who has, and there's only so many people like this. David Lynch is kind of this great example, but someone who has weathered the storm of the entertainment industry and actually been able to put out consistent good work, for over a decade. I'm sure there's a lot of periods of time where you didn't have a lot going, but you've kept at it and you've put good work out there. So what I don't know if you have any advice or just general reflections on that process.
Sure. I mean, in terms of people who are just starting to make things, I mean, I think there's a few, if I may, just a few thoughts I have that I think may be of value. One is, if I ever again taught a course in writing, whatever writing, whether screenwriting or essay writing or anything, it would focus on one thing, which is, I don't know, do you know the novelist Ottessa Moshfegh?
I do, yeah.
She's a great writer. And someone asked her in one of those dumb LA Times interviews they have at the library downtown, they said to her, what do you think is your greatest gift as a writer? And she had the best She had the best answer. She said, I finish.
Yes.
And I've talked to people about this a lot. If I taught a class, let's say I taught like a undergrad class, it would be really about one thing. Okay, you've got an idea. All right, let's say it's a short story. You have a short story. There's a boy, there's a dog, there's a car, there's a train, there's a truck, there's an accident, there's a heartwarming conclusion, whatever. You've got some notions of a story, of some characters, of an atmosphere. Okay, you have that. Here's what you're going to do in 10 weeks. Finish. You're going to start, you're going to work on it, but most importantly, you're going to finish, which means you are going to hit the button, send. Now, what people are so dumb about and don't realize is that at that moment, when your screenplay hits send, let's say, it ain't over at all. It's only begun. It's just
all you gotta
barely begun.
Do is have a good hook.
You've got this thing, and hopefully it's readable and vivid and intense, and someone goes, oh, this is interesting. But that ain't the whole story. That thing is not finished in that moment.
Yeah, because if you're sending it to a teacher, especially, or things can, especially screenplays revised up to the point, it's revised in the editing room almost. A screenplay is just a backbone of what a picture would later be. So, yeah, I think that's not that I'm a brilliantly successful writer, but that's one thing that I have found. You draw strength from that will to bring it to its completion.
It's absolutely necessary. It's the muscle that you need to have to do anything else. You can learn how to get from Act 2 to Act 3 better later. You can learn how to write snappy dialogue later.
You're not really doing it if you're not completing anything.
If you're not completing anything, you got nothing. You have just a bunch of pages in a notebook somewhere, which may mean something to you, but that's not what you need.
Absolutely.
But I think it's something about the muscle and the deliberateness and the confidence of saying, now you can look at this.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean it's written in marble for all of eternity. It just means I'm going to show you this now, and you're going to be able to read a beginning, a middle, and an end if you're working in that form. And
it's so much easier. Like, I edit as I go a lot of the time, which is fine, but you can really get trapped in that because it's good to present crafted work, but I really think that it's so much easier to edit something that's completed than it is something as you're going.
Absolutely.
In that global sense anyway.
Absolutely.
Like it's easy to say like, oh, if I move this here and this here, I'm going to have to do this. Like that's all together. If you're hanging up too much on the details, you could come up with a brilliant fix to a certain problem and say your script, but then it just doesn't work with the ending you had in mind. But if you have something complete, you can play that word Tetris.
Well, I'll tell you, I was talking to some folks that I'm working with today about the notion of the tennis net. And I had a very, lightning bolt experience the first time that I got really hired to write something for somebody else. And it was for the if you know this guy, the British horror writer, Clive Barker.
Yeah.
And I was adapting one of Clive's plays into a movie. And it was my first time really working for another person, and I got paid. I got my first check. I wanted to frame it. And then I realized, okay, well, to get my second check, I have to actually finish this script. Well, when is it due? 8 weeks. Okay, well, 8 weeks. So first I thought, okay, I'm gonna just wait, for the muse to appear, and hopefully in the next 8 weeks could appear. And then I realized, no, shit, I have to get down to work. I gotta actually finish this fucking thing and do it. So I had to divide 8 weeks. Divide the script by 8 weeks and figure out, okay, well, I'm going to do this part here, then next week I'm going to do this, the following week this, and so on. And then you broke it down further, and every day did a little bit of this, did a little bit of this, did a little bit of this. It was something where I went from how I think most writers work, which is you write when you have a good idea and you go, oh wow, wouldn't it be cool if, and you grab your pen and go, versus something where, god damn it, you have to turn this fucking thing in by Thursday. So you have to figure out how to get it done by Thursday. And there was something about that, having to chop it up and do it, that gave you a muscle in you that allowed you to do it.
I find it allows you to do it, allows you to complete it, but I find it can be helpful. A lot of artistic types, I am certainly of this cloth, are overly analytical, get hung up too much on the details, and there's something about externalizing your work in that way, where it's all of a sudden a physical thing. You almost have to chisel like marble, where you can step outside of yourself in just the right amount to actually do it. So that's, that is an incredible quote from Ottessa Moshfegh, and I think it probably goes, as much for screenwriting as anything.
Sure, I think so. I mean, I think it's so funny. It's it's so hard for people to finish, but particularly just in the realm of screenwriting, I think, one thing that you can do is if you write 5 pages per day, you will in a month you will have some version of a script. You'll have, let's say, a 120-page script. Now, if you break that down, 5 pages in a day, what is 5 pages? 5 pages is basically a scene. So forget pages and forget a computer. Sit with your roommate, sit with your girlfriend, and improvise a scene. You want to get $20 out of her. First, you're going to scare her, then you're going to flatter her, then you're going to offer her a bottle of soda water for $20. And at the end, she almost gives it to you, then decides better and walks away. Okay? There's your scene. You have a scene. You want something. She doesn't want to give it to you. You push and pull back and forth. One person or the other wins. Okay? That's it. One of those a day. If you do one of those a day, not improvising it, but actually writing it in words, you've done your work for the day. Now, it's really weird. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and people are yet totally paralyzed in being able to do that. I'm not sure what that is. I don't ever
just
really
have a considerable amount of self-doubt, I think. Like, oh, is this really the story I want to tell? You just have to throw that stuff out a little bit, and it's harder for some people than others. But you got to do it. What if you just go for it? I mean, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? I think
what's gonna how bad can it be really?
Yeah.
I think though that the feeling though, the muscle memory of finishing is so important and allows you to get into the work.
It is muscular. It's like
being able to say, here I did this stuff and now I'm letting it go into the world. Again.
I mean, I took way too many years to complete my first novel. But now that I have done that, I've been able to bring a lot of other things to completion. And I think it is muscle memory. Because also, it's muscle memory. It's also like your reward system. Remember how good it feels to complete something. Yeah. Even if it's not that you complete something and you're 100% sure it's great. You'd like to think it's the best version of what it could be, but you're not necessarily sure of that. You're just glad to have something. If it's a script, with the Brads in it, you can hand it to someone.
Right.
If you're lucky enough to actually publish something, it feels really good to do that, and that's what you got to keep chasing. And it does, maybe it doesn't even hit it with a big audience, but you still have that, and you can go from there. Yeah, no.
That's one thing. If I could just add just one other thing to this is in terms of if people are sort of beginning writers, one thing that I really disagree with the norm about is, if you read any of those screenwriting books, they will tell you, don't go in for any flowery description. Just write the basic facts, write the events. Just write the events and, Joe enters the room, he fires a gun, and the dialogue. And that's it. And just, they're always pulling for something to be terse, Hemingway-esque. And my feeling is quite the contrary. Write it like you're writing a novel, that you want someone to turn the pages and go, oh my God, now what? So the voice, the narrating voice, the voice that's telling you that Joe is walking through the door with a gun, should be seductive and compelling and vivid and juicy and make you want to turn the page. Because the fact is, to get a motion picture made, there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. Financier hoops, producer hoops, actor hoops, so many hoops. There's so many people that have to sign on, that have to read it and go, oh, I dig it, I dig it, I dig it. That you really need to turn it on for those people and create something that pops off the page.
I've heard that too, especially if you're sending out as a first-time writer, if it's a sample or something, it needs to have that caliber, But maybe you'd say it even in general. But I think there's one thing if you're writing on an assignment, you got a deadline, you got to get the script, the scene on the page. Obviously, you don't have to perseverate too much on is this well written, but especially at that earliest stage, I think it's important to actually, the voice, as you said. That's because that counts in obviously in fiction writing, that counts, but it really matters in screenwriting too. To have that voice, because that's what people are going to see. Sometimes even more than the plot itself is whether or not that voice comes through.
Yeah, and I think it's also a way of conveying the not just it is conveying the narrative, but it's also conveying the experience of the movie itself, so that hopefully
the tone.
Yeah, you get to a place where reading this script is like popping a VHS in the machine and hitting play.
Yeah,
that the screenplay is doing that. Where so many different people are good. Larry Karaszewski and his partner Scott Alexander are very good at this. The Coen brothers are great at this.
Yeah, where
you read the script and you go, oh my God, I feel like I'm literally watching the film unspool before my eyes.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
I think so too.
I think it's important. It is funny to me when you read if you ever go back and read a great movie's script that is unreadable. If you ever look at the Faber and Faber edition of Goodfellas.
Oh, really?
Oh my God, it reads like it was written by a 6-year-old or something. I mean, it's dreadful. It's completely flat.
Yeah.
Even the dialogue sounds terrible. And you see it's the most fluent movie ever made.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just absolute fluency from beginning to end.
So it's not. The movie doesn't always match up to the screenplay, but as a writer, your job is first and foremost to write a good screenplay,
right?
And a shootable screenplay, of course, but a good screenplay. Nonetheless, I did want to sort of pedal a little bit through your work more. You mentioned your first directorial debut, Your Name Here, from 2008, which sounds very interesting to me. You mentioned it's a sort of play on Philip K. Dick, with a sort of a close to his name used in it, played by Bill Pullman. But I've never seen this movie.
Oh.
Is it available anywhere?
It's hidden under a rock. This movie has so many weird chains on it. First of all, the film was called Panasonic, which I bet some of your listeners probably know was the original title that Don DeLillo had for White Noise.
Right. Yeah.
And someone from Panasonic wrote Don DeLillo a letter and said, "Hey, buddy, you can't call your novel Panasonic." I don't know why they would object to that. His notion was that it means all sounds at once, which is like a kind of schizophrenia, which he obviously captures very well in the book. Not so much in the movie, but in the book. So I thought, wow, Don DeLillo has this great title that he's not using because it was shelved for whatever. I didn't know that was why. So let's call it Panasonic. So we did. And when we started casting the movie, literally, this was in the dawn of the internet, casting notices that went out to 3 small towns in the valley.
Yeah.
In the 818.
Yeah.
The next day, "Dear sir, this is the Panasonic Corporation. You may not use our name in the title of your movie."
They're on top of things apparently. They were they were / are just an electronics company, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow,
but they're huge, right? I mean, they're still huge.
I guess so.
I'm
trying to think what they even make. It's
they make boom boxes and Walkmans and well, those are of my era. But I think they still have speakers.
Maybe do they make toothbrushes now? Electronic toothbrushes, maybe. Really need to hear
smartphones, maybe. I don't
not good ones.
No, probably not good
Anyhow,
ones. But they're still a thing. Anyway, the film became titled Your Name Here, which the notion was, imagine a real biopic like Cleopatra or Nixon, but in this case it's Your Name Here. So it's a biopic of someone with no identity. It's the movie could have been called Blank or Untitled or some, you have a big picture of Bill Pullman and then untitled, something like that, or no, you just not have a title, because it's about this slippage of identity, and it's about this character Bill Frick, who's obviously based on Philip K. Dick, who was in real life was a real train wreck. He was a drug fiend. He lived with these bikers in this house, I think like in Oakland, maybe. No, it was in Orange County. He had the IRS after him. He had all these ex-wives, and yet he wrote this incredible, ecstatic, visionary fiction about the future.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think about Philip K. Dick all the time is that he captured one thing about the dystopia that we're living in that no other writer captured, which is that it would be really janky. It would be really low rent. I grew up with really beautiful, elegant dystopian fictions like George Lucas's THX 1138, where everything is set in this, like an Apple store, this beautiful white, icy, totalitarian world, or 2001, which I think has some sort of it's funny but also terrifying in some ways.
Yeah.
But very elegant.
But very beautiful,
in a Kubrickian way.
Yeah.
But Philip K. Dick really had the notion that the future would be like an almost out of business Radio Shack. That everything that the fascists, the devices they strap on your body are not going to be these elegant, cool things. They're going to be like the sort of crummy version you'd buy at Kmart. And by extension, the notion that the whole sort of authoritarian fabric would be shabby. Yeah. That this is a shabby world. It's not an all-seeing, all-knowing world. It has all the sort of frailties and foibles of our
world, with
human
the technology
world.
Amped up, but then that decay of, I actually have not read much Philip K. Dick, so I'm just kind of extemporizing here, but the decay of that technology you see just as much.
Yeah, well, I think it's the extension of the person. Cronenberg talks a lot about that, of technology as an extension of the body, and I think Philip K. Dick portrays it as an extension of the sort of the shabbiness of the soul. It's a world of marketing guys and sales representatives more than it is of fascist superheroes. It really is a world of hucksters, and that to me feels very, very, very appropriate to now.
Very appropriate to now, and just to make a random connection here, another writer who I feel like delved into that a little bit is William S. Burroughs with some of his more technological writing. I only bring Burroughs up because I haven't seen your name here, but from what I've read about it, a good comparison is like this is the and you also mentioned Cronenberg. Cronenberg's Naked Lunch is to Burroughs as your film is /
Very much so. Yeah. Cronenberg's Naked Lunch was very much an inspiration on our movie. And the thing that's kind of fun, I think, in Your Name Here is it's about a guy who keeps passing out and waking up. And he'll pass out and wake up in the middle of a world where William J. Frick is the god everywhere. Everywhere he walks, there's statues of him everywhere and posters, and people pray to him as a god. Then someone conks him on the head. He wakes up somewhere else, and he's hunted by everyone on Earth. He's being dragged into a gulag because he's the most dangerous man on Earth. And it's a world of fantasies, and we can't quite separate the fantasy from the reality. We can't quite separate the fiction from the real life, and there's a feeling of there being sort of an infinite number of Russian dolls that he inhabits, and that we inhabit as well. And there's kind of a strange melancholy to the movie. I think. I don't remember how much we talked about this, but Bill Pullman, who is really, really sublime in this movie, is a little bit of a sort of futuristic Buster Keaton. There's a feeling of that sort of the poker face, but with a sort of wistfulness to him, which is how this Bill Frick character navigates the universe. So the problem with this picture was, every time it played in a festival, and Bill Pullman won an award for it, and then every time someone would try to buy this movie, the Philip K. Dick estate would come flying out and would bomb these little micro distributors that wanted to buy the movie and say, if you buy this movie, we'll sue you. And they just have a whole lot of money.
Yeah. So that's kind of the rock it finds itself under now?
Yeah, that's the rock. But maybe there's
Is it available?
Maybe one of your listeners knows a way that we can get out from under this rock, because I would love to get that out there.
My normal co-host is a lawyer, so I will literally bring this up with him. But it's literally you just can't watch it right now.
I could smuggle it to you.
Yeah. Maybe follow up on that later.
Sub Rosa.
Sub Rosa. Yeah. Terrible shame, and it really does sound like a striking picture.
It's a groovy, it's a groovy film. Great cast.
I suppose we'd be remiss not to talk about Dog Eat Dog a little bit. I mean, this is in some ways, would you say probably your best known film you're attached to? You didn't direct it; it was Schrader, which
Paul Schrader
that's quite a notch in your belt in of itself that you wrote a script for Schrader. But it's also actually available on Tubi now in a less bastardized version than Joan. The normal version, as it were. It is a very, very funny movie. I mean, it's very much, it's a kind of a comedic mobster heist movie, so to speak.
It's funny. It was written to be an LA noir. It's based on a novel by Eddie Bunker, who people may know is he's one of the Reservoir Dogs at the beginning. He's the guy with the mustache who gets blown away in the heist. And Eddie Bunker is probably America's greatest prison novelist. He wrote a book called No Beast So Fierce that became the movie Straight Time with Dustin Hoffman, that is a great account of a guy who spent a lot of time in prison and gets out and doesn't know how to deal with straight life in the real world. Having a job, going to bed, getting up, having a girlfriend. All those things, he doesn't really know how to deal with it. That movie, Straight Time, it's fantastic. Dustin Hoffman plays the guy.
Yeah.
And it's weird because you don't think of Dustin Hoffman as a white trash criminal, but he's perfect.
He does it well, yeah.
His best friend is Harry Dean Stanton, who's amazing in the movie.
Harry Dean. What I say about Harry Dean Stanton is he's in so many movies, and I'm probably wrong about this because I haven't seen them all, but I've never seen a Harry Dean Stanton movie I didn't like, even if he was just in like a couple frames.
Well, never seen a Harry Dean performance you didn't like.
I can't think of a bad movie, but what's a bad? Well, I've maybe seen
Pretty in Pink. I'm not going to stand up for that one, but there's a few, but whatever. Anyway. But he's great.
Well, I'll say that he's always
great.
He's always great.
He was a compadre of Jack Nicholson, who I think through Jack eventually got he worked forever and ever and ever and slowly got known. His first big moment was in Paris, Texas. Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, where he's the lead. He was great. Anyway, he and Hoffman are the two dudes in Straight Time. Terrific picture of criminal life. How hard it is to stay away from the criminal life once you are a criminal. Eddie Bunker was a brilliant guy. He was this amazing kid. He lived in L.A. He was in and out of juvenile halls as a kid. He would romance these sort of older women and hung out with William Randolph Hearst. But then he would get pinched for burgling someone's house and would go back into juvenile hall for years. Eventually he went into prison. And yet he was a real literary mind. And he wrote tons. He wrote memoirs. He wrote novels. And he eventually connected with the novelist William Styron, who people may know from Sophie's Choice. Mm-hmm. Styron wrote a letter to the warden, and one day, Eddie Bunker, who was not a super tough guy, writing in his room, writing in his cell, tapping away at the typewriter, and one day the guard came and opened the door and said, "You're free to go." And that was the end of his prison career. So he wrote this novel, Dog Eat Dog, which is about three guys who have done a lot of time together, and they are doing their one last score. Yeah. It's a one last score movie. Now, the funny thing about this movie is I wrote this for myself to direct. The producer at the time didn't get enough traction with me directing it fast enough, so he disappeared for a moment. And one day I was walking down the street and I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize of this guy going, "Matthew Wilder, this is Paul Schrader. I'm directing your movie."
Oh, wow.
So I thought, well, kind of a drag that I'm not directing it. But if someone else is directing it,
he's not the worst. Right?
I would, put him right at the top. So that film was a very good experience on all levels. But one thing that was really nice about it was it was an interesting change. I had come from theater and I had directed people's like for instance new scripts, people who were writing premieres, new plays, and sometimes those people didn't like kind of what you would do as an interpreter of their text, the way that you staged it, or the way the set looked, or whatever it may be. Schrader made a real change in the movie, not in the text. He really didn't change anything in the text, really, hardly anything. The movie was set in LA, but it was ultimately shot in Ohio, so there were some Ohio references.
Yeah.
But other than that, really nothing. But the tone, if you read the original Dog Eat Dog script, is a gritty, downbeat, 70s style crime movie, kind of like if people know the Nickel Ride that Eric Roth wrote, or Jackie Brown, kind of.
Yeah.
Friends of Eddie Coyle, that kind of 70s, a gritty 70s crime movie.
Yeah.
Now, Schrader's take on this was he invented the 70s, so he didn't have to go down that road anymore. I don't have to go do a 70s movie. I did those already. So he wanted to do something different and do something playful, I think somewhere kind of between Natural Born Killers and Godard.
I do almost see it as a comedy, which may not have been your original intent. There's hilarious parts, though.
There's funny stuff in the script, but I mean, he took it to a degree where, this all seemed almost inevitable. There's a scene where the three guys get high and they're in a hotel room, horse playing, and one of them, I think, Cage, squirts ketchup bottles on the other ones and squirts ketchup on the wall. And that, to me, seemed like it was sort of Schrader's comment on the violence in this movie is not really violence in this movie. It's cinematic. It's squirting ketchup bottles on a wall.
I think the part that made... Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. And I think the part that made me laugh the hardest was actually... I'm sure this wasn't, in the original script and perhaps supposed to be funny, but when Nick Cage's character is with the prostitute and he just wants to talk about going to Cannes, right?
Talk about going to Cannes, yeah.
Very funny. Well, we should add... for people who haven't seen it, don't know about the movie, it is Nick Cage playing opposite Willem Dafoe. Christopher Matthew Cook, also worth mentioning it, who's also in Joan. And they do make a pretty good ensemble cast. Almost,
they're great, and we should also talk about Louisa Krause, who's in that movie, who plays. It's my favorite scene, and actually, some critics who don't like the movie, like Amy Taubin, talked about how this was the best scene, which is. Louisa plays a woman who meets, and these scenes are not in the original novel. She plays a woman who meets Chris Cook's character. He's sort of like the heavy, the tough guy.
This is one of the best scenes, no doubt. Yeah.
And she meets him in a bar, in a casino, and he takes her up to his room, and it's all going well for him. But she starts asking him these questions like, "Oh, what kind of music do you listen to?" And he says, "I don't listen to music." And she goes, "Well, where do you go to hang out?" And he's like, "I don't hang out." And she asks him,
"Yeah,
well, like, who are your friends?" And he's like, "I don't fucking have friends." And he kind of explodes. And there's just a little flash of anger. And it scares her the fuck out of the room. She's like, "Okay, I have to go now." And she goes and gets out and says, "I don't feel safe," and escapes. And he comes out, and Chris Cook, who's a big bruiser of a dude, comes out and is like Woody Allen, chasing her down a hallway, like, wait, no, come back, please, come back.
I was moved by that.
I think it is very moving.
And I can really put myself in his shoes, and given his performance. He's this guy who comes out of jail. He's rough around the edges, but he does want that connection. He does want that human connection, female connection. Obviously, it's sexual, but it's not lascivious. He just wants that connection and can't achieve it. It's and then of course how the movie ends.
Well, he's enraged because I think he says something to her like, I've spent years like living in a garbage can. And I don't know what you're talking about. And he's embarrassed. He's embarrassed by the fact that she's asking him, what do you think about that Taylor Swift song or something? And he doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about because he's been in a cage for a long time.
You mentioned that Bunker, who wrote the novel, and you said that scene is not in the novel even.
No,
it isn't. So, but still picking up on that theme of Bunker being one of the great, prison and post-prison novelists. It's a very particular state of mind, and this movie, Dog Eat Dog, really captures that for someone like me who obviously has no experience with it, but nevertheless. I did want to ask just a little bit. Paul Schrader, I imagine was he long before you worked with him? He was a filmmaker you admired.
Oh, I mean that's
how could he not be? Right?
He was for me number one. I mean, of people have their screenwriting heroes, and there's people that like Robert Towne and people like William Goldman, but to me, Schrader was always the most interesting. He was the most formally daring of anyone. And also, he had a new idea, which was what he calls the monocular movie, the one-eyed movie, which is, in a way, it's like a sort of like film as monologue. In a way, it's following one person, and it's really about the war between that one person and himself, more than it is about a character versus an antagonist. The antagonist is himself.
Exactly.
That's Taxi Driver, that's Mishima.
It's even American Gigolo, I think. Yeah. It's all of his movies, which is incredible. He's obviously... I love an artist. I like people who do different things, but I really like an artist who is obviously fixated on one issue. And everything right up to this new Schrader movie, which I haven't seen, but I think it comes into theaters in May.
Yeah,
What's it called? Master Gardener. You've seen it?
Yeah.
Seems like he always tells that same story, and I absolutely love it. I think, kind of as I was saying with Joan earlier, it's like, I get Taxi Driver was very relevant in the 70s and to the 70s, but I think this Schrader narrative continues to be really vital. In a similar way we were talking about Joan, that type of character. And I've written about this elsewhere. I think it's really reductive to call it an incel type character, because it's not. It's people. It's not just people who.
It's weird that people think Schrader characters are incels now. I find that hilarious. It's I just view them as more grand, I guess.
Much more grand. Travis Bickle and Taxi Driver would come the closest to sort of being someone who seems to sort of not be able to get laid, but most of his characters aren't that at all. Most of his characters are, some of them are maybe not having sex for some reason, but what's important isn't simply that they are maybe not having sex or that they're sexually frustrated, but that sexual frustration goes to a much deeper place and it's like a portal for them to a greater dissatisfaction with the world and a greater desire to fix it or to strike out against it in some way, often in a very morally above board way, or sometimes not, certainly. But even in Mishima, which is a great example, obviously this is a real person, Yukio Mishima, but there too, he's gay and not openly so, and has all these sexual issues, but rather than just simply being, I need to find out how to have the right kind of sex to be happy, it's standing up in front of the Japanese military and making a statement. You know what I mean? It's that sexual, the incel thing or the Volcel thing. The sexual frustration is an entry point, but the issue with the world that the characters ultimately take goes so much deeper than that, and then is resolved in a way that I think sort of mirrors the sexual process. There's something kind of orgasmic about that violence, and then it sort of almost every Schrader, not Dog Eat Dog because that's your script. But everything that Schrader writes seems to follow that path. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of abstract. Yeah.
No, it does. That's why I'm always, I'm interested in some of his outlying movies. I really like his movie about Patty Hearst.
I haven't seen it actually. Yeah.
Which spends it's maybe this is Nick Kazan wrote the script. I'm sure Paul polished it. But it has a great sequence where Patty Hearst spends 20 minutes in a closet, and you're in the closet with her with the blindfold on, not just in the dark, but you're with her, and she remembers things and sees things, imagines things. She imagines what's going on. She imagines moments of her past, and as you see her in the past, she's walking around with a blindfold on. It's fantastic. It's a very daring movie. Also a one-eyed movie, but I think different from a lot of the others.
And Joan, in so many ways, is a monocular movie. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, it's
very much so.
Yeah, it doesn't quite have that Paul. I guess the more Paul Schrader-esque version would have her escape, but obviously that was not true to the story. Instead, she is more the victim well, depending how you look at it, but
Yeah,
but no, she's a Schrader-esque character is the point.
I think so.
Yeah.
You know, well, actually, what I think of our Joan, and I think this is Nicole, who plays Joan, I think is someone who is, I think right now is a little bit misunderstood by the industry in the sense that she's a redhead, and I think people view her as they view her as kind of a hippie, and she gets cast in these sort of hippie parts.
Yeah.
She has a nice part if people are watching Daisy Jones and the Six, which I think is pretty popular now, that Amazon series. She plays Riley Keough's mom.
Yeah.
And is sort of an evil mom dressed in a very Mad Men era kind of way, which is closer, I think, to the real Nicole. But
Yeah.
Nicole, to me, is very much a Hitchcock blonde, even though she's not blonde. She is very much in that mode of Tippi Hedren, of Grace Kelly, and Eva Marie Saint, and that seductive coolness that you can't read. You can't quite make her out. There's a Sphinx-like quality to her, but you keep wanting to know what's up. You want to know what's going on there. It's not like you're getting a brick wall. You're getting something that you can't read, but you really want to read it. You're pulled towards deciphering it. That's what I think makes her so interesting in this movie, and it makes the scenes, I think, with the judges kind of dramatic because even when she's answering their questions very truthfully, she isn't in a certain way. You feel like she's holding back something
definitely.
that they're not getting.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I do think there's something kind of in the water about that monocular sort of hero, and also just kind of that Schrader narrative in general. I did want to ask if you'd seen that movie Spree that Eugene Kolorenko directed.
No, I haven't seen his films.
Yeah.
How are they?
They're good. Yeah, I love Wobble Palace. I think that one's very sort of funny and out there. Spree was kind of a somewhat more buttoned down sort of type of movie, but Wobble Palace being a much more kind of indie, weird comedy fare, and Spree is also pretty bizarre actually, but it's very much in that Taxi Driver.
Kind of Taxi Driver-ish?
Very Taxi Driver-esque. Obviously that movie Joker was on a much more mainstream basis, and there's also this movie that I just saw. You know Hadrian Belov, right?
Very well.
Yeah, I figured you might. We can talk about that later, but like he recently screened, I actually wasn't there, but someone sort of looped me in on this movie Bolt Driver.
I saw this movie Bolt Driver. So a colleague of mine, Rainey Qualley, is in that movie. Who
the younger sister of...
and Rainey plays Sybil Shepherd. And I was like, what? How did this guy... I think they shot some of the film in 2016. Because she's working in a Trump headquarters. Headquarters.
Yeah.
Which to me was weird. Like, what does it mean that you take Betsy from Taxi Driver and put her in a Trump headquarters? That's...
I think it's a great... I mean, do you like Bolt Driver? You thought it was good? Or?
No, I thought it was terrible,
really?
Actually. Yeah, I don't like these things that are like...
Too much of a paraphrase
shot.
film.
Well, no, just I don't like things that are shot on an iPhone and they look like they were cut on an iPhone. And they have that just kind of YouTube junkiness to it. They have that kind of crappy, cruddy texture.
It's definitely a movie that's kind of meant to be, I think, in the fabric. It's not a movie meant to be played on a screen. It's a movie meant to be open in one tab while you have YouTube in another. So.
That's how I did it, and I actually fast forwarded through a bunch of it.
We got it's certain scenes at least. I was trying, like the Rainey Qualley as a
she's incredible. I mean she's incredible, and that's the last thing I ever imagined seeing her. Yeah, I just want to know how that guy bamboozled her into doing that movie. That was the most. That was like to me like
that's what you were thinking about.
What are you doing up there, kid?
Yeah. Well, we won't drag Bolt Driver too much. I do think there's something kind of in the water about.
No, I'm glad you dig it. I know Adrian digs it. He wrote a whole essay on it.
I was going to actually bring this up, kind of off the air, but why not on the air? You subscribe to the Carousel now, I saw.
That's a propaganda guy?
Isaac Simpson.
Isaac Simpson, right.
He's a friend of mine.
Oh, cool.
I told him about how I was doing this podcast with you.
Cool.
I don't know if you'd want to like do one with him or whatever. I don't know, but like he's a cool guy.
No,
so I'd be happy to like make the intro.
Yeah, I love it.
But no, he's got a great site going, and he knows Hadrian. It's a small world here, connecting dots. But yeah,
he's great. But it's good to know that Eugene guy's films are good because I haven't watched them.
I think they're good. I mean, if you don't like Bolt Driver, I mean, it's a little bit like that, maybe. So I mean, you may hate them, but I think there's something. Yeah.
Well, the Bolt Driver thing to me was just like, okay, so what you're gonna like literally. It seemed almost like it was a parody of Joker. It's like you're gonna remake Taxi Driver set in 2016 with Uber.
Yeah.
I mean, like what? Like, do you have? Is there a further idea here? But okay, if on your say so, I'll give it another look.
Yeah, that or watch Eugene's films, or if you're gonna watch Eugene's films, I would start with Wobble Palace.
Yeah,
because I could imagine
that's the one with Dasha.
That's the one with Dasha.
Yeah,
I can imagine you Spree maybe a little in that Bolt Driver territory. Yeah. But Wobble Palace, I think, is very funny and unlike any other movie I've ever seen. And I believe it's on Amazon or something. If you have that, so
cool.
Yeah. Other movie that you have a credit on, I think it's just a rewriting credit, so I will not dwell on it too much, but is Looking Glass in 2018, also with Nick Cage. And again, don't want to dwell on it too much because it is just a rewriting credit, right? That wasn't your original.
Well, it was a lot. This is a movie, if people have seen it, it's the director is somebody I love, Tim Hunter, who's a wonderful director, directed Razor's Edge, and he's done tons of really good TV. He's a Mad Men.
Oh, he's done some of the best TV, and even TV that like people wouldn't cite in the pantheon of like, but just like memorable. I'm thinking about he did the pilot of 90210, which is something, which is
which I know he likes that. Tim's a really good guy, and the producer of Looking Glass is a really good guy, Braxton Pope, who I think is producing Dasha's next movie, Total War, which is an amazing movie. But Braxton is a good guy, and I worked on this movie for a long time. There was a guy that they had in this movie. It's a film, Nick Cage is in it, and it's about this case of a motel in Vegas, or not, I guess outside of Vegas, somewhere in Nevada.
Desert.
That supposedly had sort of like hidden peepholes and places where voyeurs could poke their eyes in and see the goings on in this motel. So there was an original script that I thought was really bad. And then I was brought in to touch up this script and did a version I thought was really good. And Tim Hunter liked it, and Braxton liked it. And then Cage was, I think, not so into it because he would have had to relearn a lot of stuff, and it was just sort of starting over from scratch, and I think he was just kind of not that into it. But then I was brought in. There was a guy who was going to do this movie who was going to put money into the movie, and so I was writing things for him to do. And God bless him, Braxton called me 96 times and paid me 96 times to write stuff for this dude. So I wrote this scene, I wrote that scene, I wrote a scene about an elephant, I wrote a scene about this and about that. And none of it stuck. So very little of the stuff that, and I wrote pages for this movie for eons, and very little of it stuck. I think there's hardly any of it that's left in the movie, but very kindly, because so much of it didn't stick, Braxton got me an EP credit on the movie. Nice. Which was very nice for all the work having done, even though most of that work didn't stick to the movie.
You're still kind of glommed onto the project.
So it's just another,
Yeah, and Braxton is I've never met him. I would like to at some point, but he, on Braxton, he also produced a lot of Brett's films. Or films that Bret Easton Ellis has different credits on.
There's a thing that Bret did with Braxton that is so great that I feel like it's like somewhere out there in the internet. I think Bret put this on his, like, the podcast blog or something. Yeah. There's a thing that he did for this app called
The Deleted, right?
Wildscreen, called The Deleted.
Yeah.
And I saw it with Braxton right before I actually had met Bret. I saw it all. It was like a bunch of sort of like web series sized shorts. But they showed them all together as one, and it was kind of like a feature. Yeah. And it's a fantastic thing.
It is good. I saw it. It's no longer available, I don't think. But when I first moved to LA, I was, kind of really into Bret's stuff, and I was like, I got to see everything. And Wildscreen, or whatever the fuck it was called, was still up at that time, so I did a little free trial, and I did see it, and it's really well done. It's kind of that less than zero energy. It's cast with a lot of influencers, which is kind of this random thing. But yeah, it's like very kind of like the Canyons too. It just feels very of that time in a way that's
well. I liked it because I felt like it was as if he sort of pulled out most of the narrative elements, and it was just the things that he fetishizes and obsesses over. It was these hot teens and cocaine and cutting themselves and going to a loony bin.
Yeah.
It just seemed like I don't know if you know the novels or the films of Alain Robbe-Grillet, who was he was the French New Novel, and there are certain novels where it's just stripped away, where there's sort of porn images and kind of nightmare images that become a fresco, and they're not related to each other in the usual ways, and that's what I thought was kind of interesting in Brett's thing was there wasn't that sort of boilerplate plot that you usually have in a sort of teen-sploitation movie. There was just the goods.
It was just the goods.
Yeah, just the goods.
Sexual energy with that dark energy, and it's kind of like Joan Didion meets Instagram meets a lot of good things. And Brett actually directed that, which I think
he directed it. I think he did a great job.
He did a great job. He has some secretive project he's working on now, so hopefully he's going to get another chance to direct, is what he always talks about on his pod. But as of now, it's the only thing he's directed, and I do think it's very good. But yeah, just to wrap it up on Looking Glass, not even to talk about this, it didn't get a good critical response, and I kind of saw it for the first time recently, and I don't really know why it didn't get a good critical response. I think it's pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah? You liked it? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to say your definitive opinion on the final product if you don't.
I don't.
It's better than people gave it credit, I think. Okay. I think Tim Hunter did good work. I think it just has a tone that I like.
Okay. Cool. I'm sure everyone involved will take it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll wrap up on Looking Glass then. I definitely want to talk to you a little more about projects you have upcoming. We could kind of do that towards the end here, but maybe it makes sense because we were just talking about Looking Glass. I wanted to ask you, we talked a little about this when we first met the other week, but just your general take on movies that have been coming out, movies from last year. Mm-hmm. And to lead things off, last time about something specific, on the subject of Nick Cage, have you seen this movie he's in now, Inside?
That's Defoe.
I'm so sorry. Yes, I know that. Not Nick Cage, obviously. Defoe from Dog Dog.
No, I haven't seen Inside, but I was in a theater last night where I was watching a very quiet movie, Edward Yang's movie, Taipei Story. And in the theater next door, Willem's Inside movie was playing. And this very quiet movie was kind of overwhelmed by all these thuds and thumps and bumps and grumps that were coming from that room he's locked in, whatever it is. But I haven't seen it yet. It looks great, though.
Yeah, no, it is great. I wanted to give the opinion that, I'm not, as many people in this general sphere, people likely to be listening to this podcast, people kind of in the Bret Easton Ellis orbit, like there's a pessimism about a lot of movies coming out. I do think that's a good one. I think I saw it a couple weeks ago, and I think Defoe does very good work. I was curious because I know it's Defoe, not Cage. Slip of the tongue there, but because you'd worked with Defoe in the past, I was curious. I recommend it. But outside of that, I guess we could frame it this way. What was your favorite movie from last year? What's the good stuff that's coming out? Yeah.
My favorite movie last year was a film that was very little seen. It played in New York and L.A. for a moment. And it's this filmmaker. He is, I don't know, some people call him a minimalist. Some people call him a formalist. James Benning. And he makes movies that are generally landscapes. He will put a camera in front of a cloud or a mountain and shoot them for sometimes an hour at a time. And it's a very strange experience to watch his films with an audience. People, first they're into it, then they go crazy, then they go even crazier, then they get antsy, then they relax and they give over to it and they surrender, and then they start to like it, and then they hate it again. You really feel this pulsation, you feel this push and pull in the audience. And I asked Benning at one of these screenings I said, I can't imagine these movies without the theatrical experience of being in a room with other people, watching them and seeing stuff happen. And he said, I don't give a fuck about that stuff. He goes, I just want to be precise. When I photograph something, I want to be precise. I don't know if I believe that or not. It was sort of evidence of, don't listen to artists interpreting their own work because they're often wrong. But Benning made a movie last year. It was a remake of a film that he made in 1975 with his partner at the time, Betty Gordon.
Yeah. Oh.
So James Benning made this movie that was a remake of a picture that he did in 1975 called The United States of America with Betty Gordon, who was his girlfriend at the time. They made this movie together on the road driving through the States. So he did a remake of it in 2022 that was a series of shots, each one about 2 minutes, that each shot was assigned to a different state of the union. So you've got Alabama, and then you've got, you've got Maine, you've got Wyoming, blah, 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 blah. And the sort of comic punchline of the movie is that at the end it says, filmed entirely on location in Valencia, California.
Yeah.
So it's as if the whole United States is manufactured in California. But it's these images that sometimes are images of nature, sometimes images of landscapes, sometimes images of pop cultural posters, sometimes images of people, and there's occasionally some audio underneath it. There's like Stokely Carmichael talking, there's Native American activists talking underneath one thing. It's politics, it's culture, it's biology, it's geology, it's all these things put in a form that we very, very rarely see in a motion picture. And it's boffo. Like, it totally works with an audience. Like, the audience is just sitting there going, oh my God, Vermont's over. What's Wyoming going to be? There's like this strange suspense to the movie. And you feel a lot of emotions throughout this movie.
I will check it out, yeah.
And a lot of reactions. I don't think it's... I think Benning is a weirdo. I don't think it's like on any sort of home video. You can find Benning's films. If you go to YouTube, there's like a channel that has like all his stuff. But it's weird. I've looked at them at home, like, on a laptop like this, and it's like nothing. It's like watching a screensaver.
No,
There's
you want to
nothing
see
there.
it in a theater.
You have to feel it with other people, I think. It's not even so. It's not about the picture so much as it is really about the communal experience of seeing something that's really different from what our movie-going experience usually is. It's about he talks a lot about the verb seeing, and it's really about seeing, looking at something and sitting with it and really seeing the fullness of it. So that was a great film, I thought, last year. And then I also thought another great film was Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future. Mm-hmm. Which to me is very much a movie about the present. It's about transhumanism. It's about what happens when people view their bodies as these customizable objects that they can turn into something different. What does it do to their identity? What does it mean when you start pushing the limits of mortality? It's a world where there's no infection and no pain. So people start expressing their affection for each other by standing on street corners and sawing each other's, hugging each other and sawing each other's shoulders with knives, and as you're watching the movie, you feel like, oh, this kind of makes sense. It seems like I can see logic. That. And the thing that I thought was so interesting about the movie, as we get into this, a moment of trans in the culture, and also a moment where with AI, where we seem to be heading towards some higher or different ground than we've been standing on, is that I think the real shocker of this movie is that I think Cronenberg is really upbeat. Like, there's an optimistic feeling at the end that you sort of feel like, okay, as humans, maybe we're in this sort of climate disaster that the movie lives in, but we're going to somehow kind of
find our way
turn
around
into something different. Maybe it's something that we may look at now and be revolted by, but we're going somewhere.
Yeah,
we're going. We're not just falling down. We're going somewhere.
Yeah,
and
I haven't seen it yet, but that's definitely a good teaser for it.
It's really excellent.
And you when you see movies, so when you were kind of planning this podcast out and meeting originally, it seems like you're going to the movies like a few times a week. You're still a believer.
I go a lot. It's for me something that I don't know if other people have this, but for some people they do it at the gym. It's or maybe they go to church or something.
Yeah.
But it's something where I feel like you go to a space, you watch a film, and for that moment, everything drops. Everything falls to the floor, and you go into this. James Cameron, who I don't think of as a great thinker, said something really smart recently. He occasionally says smart things. He said, He said the single individual unit of cinema is a face talking, which I thought that sounds like Godard more than it sounds like James Cameron. But he said something recently, which is he said, when you go to a movie theater, you pay to have your attention hijacked. You pay to not be like, I'm looking at my phone, looking at my email, I'm looking at my...
Absolutely critical.
You're paying to go somewhere else.
And it's not going to be the same even if you have the nicest home theater system imaginable.
I don't think that has anything to do with it, actually. I mean,
maybe. I don't have that.
No, I don't either. But I'm just saying, like, okay, I could have a nice home theater, but, like, if my phone's buzzing in my pocket, I'm still going to kind of go, okay.
That's what I'm saying. Like if you, it's you like the act of going somewhere in your car, sitting with other people is also part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it is that you mentioned going to church. Fascinating. Like it is that communal feeling about it, and I think it's really important. The last movie I saw like that, not the last movie I saw in a theater, but the last movie where I saw it in a theater and it felt meaningful that I saw it in a theater was Tar, which I was also going to ask you. I know your opinion on it. I was going to ask you about it for the pod. And that movie I think is great. It's pretty much my fairly basic opinion, but it's one of my favorite movies from last year. And I just know that as much as I like it, it would not have been the same if I'd watched it on a laptop.
Oh, no way.
I needed to kind of be glued in that seat for 3 hours and really be on the ride with this character, Lydia Tarr, Kate Blanchett. It just was a very good movie watching experience.
Yeah, it's funny. There are some movies like that are not. It's like in a way, it's like not a particularly cinematic movie. It's a talking movie, but there is something when you see Tar in a theater.
It's so long. Like you need to. I don't know. I need that.
But I feel like it also has this kind of tingling excitement that's like watching a live show. It's like watching Kate Blanchett. I've seen her on stage, and I think she actually was more exciting on stage in Tar than when I saw her appear in a play.
Yeah.
But it has that feeling of a performance, unfolding in front of your eyes, which I really dig that. But I love. Theatrical experiences that are not always like, I'm in a huge theater filled with people laughing their heads off or crying or whatever. I've been, I remember seeing a great Eric Rohmer movie called Astraea and Celadon. That's about like sort of, it's like a sort of medieval poem about shepherdesses and sort of magical characters that I saw at the Anthology Film Archives in New York with two very wet bag ladies coming in out of the rain.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if they were paying attention to the movie that was unspooling in front of them. They just wanted heat.
Yeah.
But it was such a sublime experience. And I think that all the time. Richard Brody, who I respect very, very much, and I love him. He's a film critic of The New Yorker. And he said something like, to me, the film is the whole equation. It's like it's like to him like a biopsy on a slide. And to me, the film is the film, of course, it is itself, but it's also the experience that surrounds the film. Did you see this film with a girl that you were in love with? Did you see this film with your parents? Did you see it alone in a dark theater? I remember, just to go back to this movie, I was in the early 90s, I was working on an opera in a small town in Lille, in France. I was the guy who made the extras in Don Giovanni whirl around, and I had a day off. I didn't speak great French. I didn't know anybody in the town, and I was walking around in the morning on a Tuesday, and I came upon a little tiny box of a cinema that was playing Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
And I went in, and it was like I could have been watching It's a Wonderful Life. It was a little slice of home. All of a sudden, there's Travis Bickle.
Yeah.
And I found myself laughing. That film is actually a very funny movie.
Yeah.
And I was laughing at stuff, and these French people would turn their heads back at me and look at me like, that's not funny. Because the subtitles didn't render it funny.
Yeah.
But actually, it was extremely funny.
Yeah.
But that was just, to me, an experience of, that was so memorable because it's this very unheartwarming movie that was totally heartwarming. That was like a little slice of the homeland.
Sticks with you, yeah.
But I love that. That's the thing that I feel like, you couldn't name your top 10 home video experiences. You couldn't.
Yeah.
But you could probably name a bunch of really good theater experiences that aren't necessarily great movies. They were just great moments that you remember for the experience.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
One thing that really comes across in any other podcast or interview I've heard or read from you is that, you are definitely like a true cinephile. You have this encyclopedic knowledge of movies from the 60s, 50s.
Maybe not encyclopedia.
Maybe that's too much, but nevertheless. So I did think a fun question as we move towards the end here. Not that this has to be the last question, but what are if it's not too hard of a thing to sort of think of, you can name them off the top of your head, which I get the feeling maybe you can. What are 5 or 10 movies that you feel like a lot of millennials and Gen Z haven't seen that would behoove them, if there's people who are serious about movies, to watch?
Sure.
It doesn't have to be 10, that's a lot, but
there's so many. I mean, I would say, just off the top of my head, one that you can see on YouTube that's a movie that's almost extinct. I think it's one of the best films of the 70s that no one knows. The only person who ever really supported this movie was Pauline Kael. No one else really gave it a lot of love. It's a movie by Yvonne Passer called Born to Win. And it's about a junkie played by George Segal. Now, I don't know if your listeners know George Segal, but he spent most of his career doing sort of light comedies. He was considered a light comedy guy. He came up around sort of the time of Elliot Gould, and he did sort of light stuff. And in this movie, he plays a junkie in New York who's a hairdresser, but he is in that point where his addiction is such that he really spends all his time hustling to get junk and to kind of keep himself in the stuff, and has schemes and scams and all kinds of things. And Karen Black plays his girlfriend. And it's, to me, the beauty of this film is it's one of those really rare things where you see a movie that is hyper naturalistic. It's gritty, it's grimy, it's New York in 1971, not pretty locations. And yet, it's the most poetic movie. Yeah. It is the most lyrical movie. It's the most exquisite. It's gorgeous, and it's very. That's a movie that's very little known. Then I would say, for people who are young, one thing to look at that I think, in my experience, people who are young who are cinephiles aren't pushed towards too much.
Yeah,
is sort of the golden age of Hollywood, like pre-1960.
Yeah, no, I my knowledge of that stuff's very limited.
Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff is not being served up to people as much as it should. I mean, if people watch, young people don't generally have cable TV, but if you do, you turn to classic movies. Obviously, is essential for people. But I would say to people, get into the canon of film, which is now, being dismantled or just thrown in the closet. Ford, Hawks, Chaplin, Renoir. I'll just throw off the top of my head. There's one great movie that I think it has a very contemporary feel. Anthony Mann, who is a great journeyman director, made some great westerns, made great epic sort of sword and sandal movies at the end of his life, but a very personal filmmaker, particularly in the 50s, very violent, neurotic, dark movies in popular genres. But he did a movie in the early 40s called Dr. Broadway that's about a guy who's a doctor in sort of a Guys and Dolls like Broadway milieu. And part of the movie is sort of like a screwball comedy. Part of the movie is like a really lethal noir. And the way the two sort of swirl around each other is very weird. It feels a little bit like a contemporary Coen Brothers movie. Like you can see them taking those two worlds and kind of spinning them around each other. But the way this movie does it is really, really unexpected and funny and strange. And that's like nobody's seen that movie, and I really recommend that one to everyone.
That's good. Yeah, no. I think that's a good answer. It gives some people the couple titles there and some just general guidelines to sink your teeth into. I mean, it's something I think about a lot. I would never call myself a cinephile because I can't. That meme like, oh, you say you're a Nirvana fan, name all their songs, or like I wish I had a little bit more of that like knowledge, because I know there's so many great movies I haven't seen, but I always like to hear.
There's great stuff.
There's just a lot of great stuff that's just off the radar, unfortunately, not on the streamers or not obviously on them.
But what I think is really funny is for people who are, I don't know, people who are writing movies or directing films here or whatever they're doing. The thing that I think is so it's so nourishing to me in terms of studying film and sort of ingesting a lot of film is the thing that's cool about it is the influences on you are not necessarily the ones you might expect. So that like while writing Doggy Dog, that scene with Louisa and Chris Cook, to me, it actually really does play out like a Woody Allen scene.
Yeah.
And I feel like I kind of got that scene, not that I stole it, but the feeling of it comes as if you're watching a comedy drama by Woody Allen.
Yeah.
Not some tough guy movie where people are punching each other in the face, but that kind of movie.
Yeah.
And I feel like those things feed into you not in the obvious ways. They sometimes sprout
a lot
their
of
heads
it's
up.
sort of what's the word I'm looking for? By osmosis, almost like it's just part of your artistic upbringing, and it seeps in. And that's often very much the art is bringing different things together in novel ways, and it produces really good results. But I guess we're winding down a little bit towards the end of the conversation. But any other hot takes you might want to get off your chest on, or about anything? I was going to say about Oscar fare from last year on Tar or Everything Everywhere All at Once, if you want to comment, or any good TV. But actually, I'll just open the floor. I mean, anything you want to say.
Good TV. Yeah, I really liked this series called Swarm. I don't know if you've seen
No,
that.
I haven't.
Donald Glover, who did Atlanta.
I want to watch Atlanta. Everyone tells me Atlanta's really good.
Atlanta's great. Seasons 1, 2, and 4 are really good. 3 is kind of iffy.
Yeah.
But he's a genius, and it's a series about a girl who's part of the. Somebody told me they call it the Bayhive, Beyonce.
Oh, the Beehive, yeah.
Or is it the Beehive?
Yeah.
Is it the Beehive or the Bayhive?
I think it's the Beehive, but it might be.
I said Beehive, and someone corrected me and said Bayhive, but whatever. The Beyonce Hive. So it's a young girl who is into that, and she finds people who are on Twitter talking shit about the Beyonce character, and she kills them. And Donald Glover said it was based on The Piano Teacher and The King of Comedy.
Right. I'm familiar. I haven't seen it, but I've read about this.
It's
a TV show? I thought it was a movie. That's
it's
why
a limited
I was
series. I think it's like 7
series,
episodes.
which is kind of like the new version of a movie in some ways. I mean, it's a whole other ball of wax, but yeah.
It's really good. Yeah. Last episode, not so good. But the real shocker is, in the 4th episode, there's this sort of... what in the 70s they used to call an encounter group, this group of women who are sort of being groovy together and being, enhancing feminism. And it's run by Billie Eilish. And if you had never seen her before, you would see her in the show and you would think she was some New York Broadway extremely experienced stage actress who is just full of chops and
so she's really good.
Confidence. She's fantastic.
That's good.
Fantastic.
Good.
And nothing like that sort of like blob persona that she has, on stage.
Yeah.
She's really poised and really cocky and cool.
Yeah.
And fantastic.
I'm glad to hear that for her because not to talk about music much, but I'm glad to hear that for her because it seems like she was kind of one of the last remaining pop stars for a minute there, but she's kind of, with all due respect to her, fallen. You don't really.
Really? She's only 20.
I know, but that's the thing. But she hasn't had a hit song in a while. Maybe I'm just out of the loop.
She won an Oscar when she was 20.
Great for her. All I'm saying is I don't feel
How many
like
people can say that?
Not many. I just don't feel like I'm hearing her music as much. But if she has acting chops, that's good. I mean, she can do that.
Okay, here's my beautiful neighbor. You're on a podcast now, Wendy. Here's the question: Is Billie Eilish washed up?
What? No.
I didn't say she was washed up. I'm just saying
she's fresh and happy.
Is she over the hill?
How could she be over the hill? She's under 21.
Is she still under 21?
Not over the hill.
Yeah.
Have you seen her on this TV show, Swarm?
No, but I love her.
Oh my God.
No, I like her too.
Phineas too.
Yeah. The only point I was trying to make is I think I'm just glad that she's a good actress too. There's another direction because music can be such a short-lived 15 minutes of fame thing.
I can't believe I photobombed a podcast.
Wait, what is the book? May I see?
Oh, it's so good. So good.
Beautiful writers. Okay, maybe this is appropriate to this.
Yeah.
Journey of Big Dreams and Messy Manuscripts.
Interesting.
Marvelous.
I'm waiting for one of my writing colleagues right now. So
Cool.
I'll carry on.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
Sure, you too.
Well, I think we're almost ready to wrap up.
Okay.
But I was gonna ask you what you thought. We should this Peter Vack screening. Yeah.
420.
Yeah. We should do that. I was gonna.
Okay.
Have you seen his movie? I was gonna.
I started watching it once late at night, and there were some scenes I liked, but it also had that Bolt driver, like that sort of like
Oh, it definitely is that. Yeah.
that frenetic editing. Not even like everything everywhere, but like sort of YouTube-y frenetic
Yeah.
editing that just kind of gave me a bit of a headache. But I'm happy to watch the whole thing. I know lots of people I greatly respect it. So
Yeah. No, yeah.
I'm down
I'm
for
interested to check it out. I just, I was curious about the general sense that, like, have you heard this concept of the vibe shift and like?
Yeah, but what is that? What is that about?
A little bit like we were talking about politically, or well, not exactly. Just people kind of in. I mean, one way to define it is people in creative fields, the fashionable world. The red scare is the vibe shift. Is one way to understand.
They are the vibe shift?
Yeah, in a way, it's
Wow.
like that cultural influence where all of a sudden it's not everyone's liberal in the way they once were, and instead there's these alternative points of views,
Right.
and it's seeping into art. Obviously, Peter Vack works with Dasha and them, so I guess that would be.
Well, I'll just say
Black
this:
shift,
I was
yeah.
okay, this is so bad. I was at the Metrograph recently with a friend. You know, the restaurant part of the Metrograph upstairs, and our server was a painter, and she was talking about her painting and about art school, and she was sort of fed up with the political correctness of art school. And the friend that I was with said to her, "Oh, are you familiar with the Red Scare podcast?"
Yeah.
And without missing a beat, this girl, who's probably about 25, said, "I consider myself post-Red Scare."
Oh wow, that's kind of frightening in a way, but
I mean, I was like, I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
yeah. Well, maybe something. Maybe it's the vibe shift. I don't know.
Is
But
that a post-shift?
a post-shift or like maybe it could be, post doesn't always mean anti, right? Like post is like post-punk or like post-impressionism. Like you're someone who the wheels of that thing have traveled
off.
over you, or like you've been like that's part of your upbringing is like just being immersed in Red Scare, whatever the case might be, and you are looking through the world from those eyes and
Wow.
finding new possibilities. This is all rather abstract, so we can diverge from it. But just to wrap things up, again, anything else any other closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. I don't know. I guess we were, the overview is talking about the creative process, and I think I just want to underline finishing to people, and I want to also just come up. There's one thing I would just like to say to people about their creative work, which is, I was for a long time, I don't know, 2-3 years. I taught here in Los Angeles at the Fashion Institute. I taught writing, all different kinds of writing, critical writing and creative writing and all sorts of stuff. And one thing that was always very shocking and kind of a little sad to me was I would try to get people to write about things. I would say, write about something that you feel really passionately about. You can hate it, you can love it. It could be a pair of shoes, it could be your boyfriend, it could be a fried egg, whatever you just feel something about, give it to me in words, whatever that is. And I would have some moments where I would kind of look out at a sea of faces that were just blank, nothing. They weren't mad about anything, they weren't hungering for anything, they weren't lusting for anything. I think for artists, at least certainly in an opening phase, I think the most important thing is to know your own feelings, to know what turns you on, to know what scares the shit out of you, to know what makes you laugh, to know what angers you, to have those moments, to have and really literally to have things in books and movies that you can point to and say, this moment blew my mind. This moment is amazing.
Yeah.
I want to conceive and create something that is that has the power and attack of this thing. And I feel like we're in a culture where people are not particularly encouraged to feel that kind of vividness in their emotions about something. And I think if you can tap into that, all the other stuff, the craft, is really, it will come.
It will
It's
come.
secondary to that. If you don't have that powerful heartbeat, that something really sets your hair on fire, if you don't have that, you can have all that craft and you have really
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah.
All right, I think that's a good note to end on.
All right.